The Amazon has a way of making even experienced hunters question what they just saw. Across northern Brazil, Peru, and Colombia, local communities have passed down stories for generations about enormous green anacondas lurking beneath blackwater rivers. Most are legends. Some are eyewitness accounts. A few are supported by observations from wildlife researchers studying the region. One thing is certain. The world's largest snake is real. And when it slips beneath the surface, you'd never know it was there. In 2014, wildlife conservationist Paul Rosoli came face to face with the crushing power of a giant green anaconda during a filmed expedition. He survived, but later described the experience as one of the most dangerous moments of his life. His encounter wasn't the only reason people fear these rivers. Hunters, fishermen, and indigenous communities throughout the Amazon have long shared the same warning. Never trust still water. Because in this rainforest, the danger you can see is rarely the danger that finds you. Today we're traveling deep into the heart of the Amazon to explore the real encounters, eyewitness accounts, scientific discoveries, and ancient legends that have turned the green anaconda into one of the most feared predators on Earth. This isn't a story about a monster. It's about an animal so perfectly adapted to its environment that it can disappear in water barely deep enough to cover your knees. For millions of years, the Amazon has belonged to creatures that mastered patience instead of speed. The green anaconda is one of them. Unlike big cats that stalk through the jungle or crocodilians that explode from the riverbanks, the anaconda doesn't chase its prey. It waits, completely motionless, sometimes for hours, sometimes for an entire day. Its olive-green scales blend into floating vegetation. Fallen branches disguise the shape of its body. Muddy water hides everything except two small eyes and a pair of nostrils resting just above the surface. To someone passing by, it looks like nothing more than another piece of driftwood. That's exactly what makes it so dangerous. Researchers who have spent years studying these snakes often describe the first sighting the same way. You don't find the anaconda. The anaconda lets you notice it. By the time you realize what you're looking at, it has probably been watching you for several minutes. And that's exactly what happened to a group of local hunters during the rainy season in northern Brazil. The morning began like hundreds before it. 5 men pushed a narrow wooden canoe into a flooded section of forest just before sunrise. They weren't searching for snakes. They were looking for wild pigs that often crossed the higher patches of ground after heavy rain. The river was unusually calm. No wind. No birds calling overhead. Even the howler monkeys, normally loud enough to echo for miles through the jungle, had fallen silent. At first, no one thought much of it. But the oldest hunter in the group suddenly stopped paddling. He scanned the water in complete silence. Then he quietly said something that made the younger men grip their paddles a little tighter. The jungle is holding its breath. None of them understood what he meant. Not yet. But within minutes, they would. The younger hunters looked at each other, unsure whether to laugh or listen. The oldest man in the canoe, Miguel, never took his eyes off the water. The jungle is holding its breath, he whispered. No one answered, because they could feel it too. The air had changed. The constant buzzing of insects had disappeared. The parrots that had been screaming overhead only minutes earlier were gone. Even the river looked frozen. If you've never been to the Amazon, silence might sound peaceful. But here, silence is a warning. Miguel slowly dipped his paddle into the water, not to move the canoe but to test the current. The river should have been flowing. Instead, the water barely moved. Daniel wiped the sweat from his forehead and forced a nervous laugh. It's just quiet. Miguel shook his head. No. It's waiting. Those words hung in the humid air. No one knew what he meant. Until something bumped the side of the canoe. Thud. Soft. Slow. Deliberate. Every head turned. Nothing. Just dark water reflecting the trees. Carlos leaned over the edge trying to see beneath the surface. Probably a branch, he muttered. Miguel grabbed his arm so hard Daniel could hear the fabric tear. Don't. Carlos froze. Why? Miguel didn't answer. He was staring at something 20 feet ahead. At first, Daniel couldn't see it. Then, a shape. Long. Dark. Almost perfectly straight. Floating beside a half-submerged tree. A log. Daniel whispered. Miguel's face turned pale. There weren't any logs here 5 minutes ago. The canoe drifted closer. Nobody paddled. Nobody spoke. The shape never moved. 30 feet away. 20. 15. Daniel noticed something strange. The log wasn't floating with the current. It wasn't moving at all. Then he saw it. 2 small circles just above the water. Watching them. His stomach dropped. The shape beneath the surface seemed endless. Not because they could see all of it, but because they couldn't. The black water swallowed everything below the surface. For all they knew, the animal could have stretched halfway across the river. Miguel slowly raised his hand. No sudden movements. No splashing. He mouthed one word. But the hunters began easing the canoe away. Every paddle stroke felt impossibly loud. The snake didn't move. It simply watched. Its eyes never blinked. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Daniel thought maybe they had escaped. Then the water behind the canoe erupted. A violent wave slammed into the back of the boat, rocking it so hard everyone grabbed the sides. Nobody saw the snake. Only the wake it left behind. Something enormous had just moved beneath them. Not beside them. Beneath them. Daniel's heart pounded so hard he could hear it over the water. Miguel didn't look back. He kept paddling. Faster now. Still trying not to splash. Because every hunter in the Amazon knows one terrifying truth. If you can finally see the anaconda, there's a good chance it has been watching you for much longer than you've been watching it. And sometimes, it doesn't reveal itself because it's hunting. Sometimes, it reveals itself because it wants you to leave. No one spoke for nearly 5 minutes. The only sound was the steady rhythm of paddles cutting through the black water. Miguel kept glancing over his shoulder. Not because he could see anything, but because he couldn't. The river behind them was empty. Too empty. Daniel finally broke the silence. Do you think it followed us? Miguel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he scanned the riverbank. The flooded trees. The hanging vines. Every shadow looked alive. Finally, he said quietly, "If it wanted us, we wouldn't be talking." Those words settled over the canoe like a storm cloud. No one said another word. By late afternoon, the hunters reached a narrow channel that none of them remembered seeing before. The current had changed. Heavy rains had flooded this part of the forest, creating new waterways overnight. "It wasn't here last season," Carlos muttered. Miguel frowned. "We're lost." The sentence hit harder than anyone expected. Getting lost in the Amazon wasn't like getting lost in an ordinary forest. There were no roads, no landmarks, no phone signal, only endless water and trees that all looked exactly the same. The smell reached them. Rot. Not the normal smell of wet leaves. Something stronger. Something sweet. The unmistakable scent of death. Daniel covered his nose. What died? Miguel's face hardened. Keep moving. But the river seemed determined to answer for him. A few yards ahead, something pale floated against a cluster of roots. At first it looked like driftwood. As they drifted closer, it became a capybara, or what was left of one. Its body was twisted unnaturally, as though every breath had been squeezed out of it. There were no bite marks, no torn flesh, just deep impressions circling its body, perfectly spaced. Carlos swallowed. Anaconda. Miguel nodded. And not a small one. The hunters stared silently. The animal had died only hours earlier. The water around it was still clear. Meaning, whatever had killed it hadn't gone far. Daniel suddenly remembered something his grandfather used to say. Never stay where the river has just fed. He used to think it was just another old jungle superstition. Now, it felt like a warning. The sun dipped lower. Darkness arrived quickly beneath the dense rainforest canopy. Miguel pointed toward a patch of higher ground. We camped there. Everyone climbed out of the canoe without saying a word. Within minutes, a small fire crackled between them. Its orange light pushed back the darkness. But only a few feet. Beyond that, the jungle disappeared into complete blackness. Daniel sat quietly, staring at the flames. Then he noticed something. The insects had stopped again. Every conversation around the fire died instantly. The silence had returned. Not gradually. All at once. Carlos reached for his flashlight. Miguel stopped him. Listen. Nothing. No frogs. No birds. No buzzing insects. Only the slow crackling of burning wood. Then, a splash. Somewhere across the river. Everyone looked up. Another splash. Closer this time. Daniel shined his flashlight toward the water. The beam reflected off hundreds of leaves. Floating branches. Twisted roots. Nothing else. He exhaled. I'm telling you, there's nothing there. Miguel never looked away from the river. That's what worries me. Seconds later, 2 small circles reflected in the flashlight. Green. Perfectly still. As nobody moved. The eyes disappeared beneath the surface without making a sound. Carlos forced a smile. Probably a caiman. Miguel slowly shook his head. No. Cayman's blink. Those eyes. Never did. Daniel suddenly realized something that made the blood drain from his face. The reflection wasn't across the river anymore. It was much closer. Much closer. The fire popped loudly. Everyone flinched. When Daniel looked back toward the water, the eyes were gone. But something else had appeared. A slow V-shaped ripple, moving directly toward the shore. And whatever was making it was far larger than any caiman they had ever seen. The ripple stopped. Only a few feet from the muddy bank. No one breathed. The fire crackled softly behind them, but its light reached only the first line of trees. Beyond that, the jungle swallowed everything. Daniel gripped his flashlight with trembling hands. Where did it go? Miguel's eyes never left the water. It didn't go anywhere. It's waiting. The words barely left his mouth when something heavy slid through the reeds. A sound so soft it almost blended with the wind. Almost. Carlos swung his flashlight toward the shoreline. Nothing. Only tangled roots. Vines. Dark water. Then, another sound. Closer. Not from the river this time. From the trees. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. How is that possible? Miguel whispered. It isn't. The beam swept across the mud. For a second. Nothing. Then the light froze. A trail. Not footprints. A single enormous groove carved through the wet earth. Almost 3 feet wide. It began at the river, crossed directly behind their camp, and disappeared into the jungle. No one had heard it. No one had seen it. Something enormous had crawled past them. While they were staring at the water, Carlos slowly turned around. If it came onto land. He couldn't finish the sentence. Miguel already understood. We weren't watching the right direction. A cold silence settled over the camp. The hunters suddenly realized the ripple on the river might never have been the predator. It might have been a distraction. Miguel stood up immediately. Put the fire out. Daniel stared at him. What? The fire. But that's the only thing keeping it away. Miguel shook his head. No. It's the only thing telling it exactly where we are. The realization hit everyone at once. In the darkness beyond the firelight, they couldn't see anything. But anything out there could see them. Carlos kicked dirt over the flames. One by one, the glowing embers disappeared. Darkness swallowed the camp instantly. It was absolute. The kind of darkness where holding your hand in front of your face made no difference. Daniel had never experienced anything like it. His breathing grew faster. He could hear someone else breathing too. Heavy. Slow. Not beside him. Somewhere. Just beyond the trees. Then, the smell returned. Wet earth. Rotting leaves. And something else. A musky odor so strong it seemed to coat the back of his throat. Miguel whispered, "Don't move." Daniel nodded instinctively. Even though Miguel couldn't possibly see him. The breathing stopped. Seconds crawled by. A minute. Then another. No one dared speak. Suddenly, crack. A thick branch snapped. Not from above. At ground level. Something large was moving through the undergrowth. Slowly. Deliberately. Not charging. Circling. Daniel felt sweat running down his neck. Every instinct screamed at him to run. But run where? The jungle was a maze. The river was behind them. And whatever was out there already knew the terrain far better than they did. Then without warning, the moon slipped between the clouds. For only a heartbeat, silver light spilled across the shoreline. It was enough. Daniel saw it. A section of thick olive green body stretched across the mud between 2 trees. It was wider than a man's chest. Its scales glistened like wet armor. The body disappeared into the darkness in both directions. He couldn't see the head. He couldn't see the tail. Only the middle. And somehow, that was even worse. Because if that was only the middle, how much of it was still hidden? The moon vanished behind the clouds again. The jungle returned to black. Daniel wasn't sure if he had imagined what he'd seen. Until Miguel spoke. His voice was barely audible. "Don't look for its head." Daniel swallowed hard. "Why?" Miguel answered without hesitation. "Because if you can see its head, it's already decided where to strike." At that exact moment, something splashed into the river behind them. Every hunter turned instinctively toward the sound. Miguel's eyes widened. No. Before he could finish, a deafening scream erupted from the opposite side of the camp. It was Carlos. Then, the scream stopped. All at once. As if the jungle itself had swallowed the sound. "Carlos!" Daniel shouted before Miguel clamped a hand over his mouth. "Quiet." "But, listen." The The jungle had gone silent again. Not the peaceful silence of night. This was different. Felt wrong. Carlos had screamed only seconds ago. Now there was nothing. No crashing through bushes. No cries for help. Not even footsteps. It was as if the jungle had swallowed him whole. Miguel slowly reached for the shotgun resting against a tree. His hands didn't shake. His eyes did. "I've hunted these rivers for 32 years, he whispered. "I've heard jaguars take deer. I've heard caimans drag cattle into the water. But I've never heard silence after a man screams." Daniel's chest tightened. "What do we do?" Miguel looked toward the darkness where Carlos had disappeared. "We don't chase fear. Fear wants you to follow." For several long seconds, nobody moved. Then, a voice drifted through the trees. "Miguel?" It was faint. Almost too faint to hear. Daniel's eyes lit up. "That's him." He took one step forward. Miguel grabbed the back of his shirt. "No. But that's Carlos." Miguel stared into the darkness. "No. It sounds like Carlos." The difference froze Daniel in place. "Help." The voice came again. Closer this time. Weak. Painful. As if someone were struggling to breathe. Daniel could barely hold himself back. "We have to help him." Miguel slowly shook his head. "Listen carefully." Daniel held his breath. The voice repeated itself. "Help?" Exactly the same. Every pause. Every breath. Every word. Perfectly identical. Miguel's face turned pale. Nothing in the jungle repeats itself exactly. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. The realization struck him all at once. Whatever was making that sound wasn't calling for help. It was luring them. The voice came again. This time. Only 20 feet away. "Miguel?" A branch creaked. Leaves rustled. Something heavy shifted its weight in the darkness. Daniel aimed his flashlight toward the sound. Miguel slapped it downward. "Don't." "But if you shine the light, it'll know exactly where your eyes are." The words barely left his mouth when another sound echoed from behind them. The slow, wet slide. The kind of sound something enormous makes when its weight drags across soaked earth. Daniel turned his head inch by inch. The moon slipped from behind the clouds. For a heartbeat, the shoreline became visible. The canoe. The dying embers. The river. Then, he saw it. A massive coil lay half in the water and half on the mud. It was thicker than an oil drum. Its scales reflected the moonlight in dull shades of green and black. The body disappeared beneath the surface before either end could be seen. Daniel's breathing stopped. It wasn't just a snake. It was the largest living creature he had ever seen outside a zoo. The head rose slowly from the reeds. Not high. Just enough for two amber eyes to clear the grass. Those eyes weren't angry. They weren't wild. They were calm. Patient. Ancient. As if they had watched generations of hunters come and go. The snake didn't strike. It didn't hiss. It simply watched. Miguel lowered the barrel of the shotgun. Daniel stared at him in disbelief. "Why aren't you shooting?" Miguel never looked away from the snake. "Because if I miss..." His voice cracked for the first time that night. "We won't get a second chance." Then something happened that none of them expected. The giant anaconda slowly turned away from the camp. Without a sound, it slipped back toward the black water. Its enormous body vanished inch by inch beneath the surface until only the ripples remained. For a moment, relief washed over Daniel. Maybe it was over. Maybe it had decided to leave. Then Miguel whispered the words Daniel would never forget. "No. It isn't leaving." Daniel looked at him. "What do you mean?" Miguel kept staring at the river. "It's circling. And in water this dark. You never know where it'll surface next. Somewhere out on the river." A single ripple broke the mirror-like surface. Then another. Then nothing. The Amazon had gone quiet once again. And this time, even the wind seemed afraid to move. No one slept. They didn't dare. Miguel sat with the shotgun resting across his knees, his eyes fixed on the black water where the anaconda had disappeared. Daniel kept checking his watch. Only 12 minutes had passed. It felt like hours. The darkness pressed against them from every direction. Every few minutes, something splashed. Never close enough to see. Never far enough to ignore. Then, the first light of dawn crept through the trees. The forest slowly came back to life. Birds began calling. Insects buzzed. Somewhere in the distance, howler monkeys roared. Daniel let out a shaky breath. "It's over." Miguel didn't respond. He simply stood and walked to the riverbank. The others followed. Then everyone stopped. The canoe was gone. Only a frayed rope floated where it had been tied. Daniel looked around in disbelief. What happened? Miguel crouched beside the mud. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The ground told the story. A single drag mark led from the tree to the water. Not the jagged scrape left by a drifting current. A perfectly straight line. As if something had pulled the canoe away. Slowly. Deliberately. Miguel touched the wet mud. It didn't drift. Daniel's stomach tightened. You think, the snake? Miguel stood. I don't know. But something moved it. The nearest village was nearly 20 miles away. Without the canoe, the river had become a prison. For the first time since entering the Amazon, Miguel looked afraid. Pack everything. We leave on foot. Daniel stared into the endless jungle. Through there? Miguel nodded once. It's our only chance. The deeper they walked, the stranger the forest became. The trees grew taller. The sunlight disappeared beneath a ceiling of thick vines. Roots twisted across the ground like giant snakes. Every shadow seemed to move. Every broken branch made them stop. An hour passed. Then two. No trail. No signs of other people. Only the endless green maze. Daniel suddenly noticed something. Miguel? What? We've seen this tree before. Miguel turned. A massive kapok tree stood beside them. Lightning had split its trunk years ago, leaving a jagged scar that stretched from the roots to the highest branches. There was no mistaking it. They had passed it earlier. Carlos had carved his initials into the bark the day before. The carving was still there. Fresh. Daniel's pulse quickened. We're walking in circles. Miguel unfolded an old compass. The needle spun wildly. West, north, then back again. It refused to settle. Miguel frowned. That's impossible. The oldest hunter, Rafael, quietly crossed himself. My grandfather warned me about places like this. Daniel looked at him. What places? Places the jungle doesn't want you to leave. Miguel shot him a sharp look. Enough. But even he couldn't explain the compass. Or how experienced hunters had somehow returned to the same tree 3 times. By midday the heat became unbearable. Their water was almost gone. No one had spoken for nearly an hour. Then Daniel froze. There. Everyone followed his gaze. Fresh mud. Pressed into it. A trail. Not footprints. Not paw prints. A wide, smooth groove weaving between the trees. It hadn't been there minutes earlier. Miguel knelt beside it. The edges were still wet. His fingers hovered just above the mark. It's fresh. Very fresh. Daniel scanned the forest. You mean? Miguel nodded slowly. It passed after we did. Silence. Every hunter turned at once. Looking behind them. Nothing. Only vines swaying gently in the humid breeze. Then Raphael whispered something so quietly Daniel almost missed it. It isn't following us. Daniel frowned. What do you mean? Raphael swallowed. It keeps getting in front of us. No one answered. Because every groove they had found had appeared ahead of their path. Never behind. As though whatever was making them already knew where they were going. Miguel looked toward the thick wall of trees. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. We're not tracking it anymore. It's tracking us. Before anyone could respond, a deep splash echoed through the forest. Not from behind them. Not to the side. Straight ahead. The hunters stared into the dense vegetation. There shouldn't have been water there. Their map showed only dry ground. Yet another splash echoed through the trees. Slow. Heavy. As if something enormous had slipped beneath the surface. Miguel slowly raised the shotgun. There shouldn't be a river in front of us. He pushed aside a curtain of hanging vines. Everyone stepped closer. Then their faces drained of color. The river hadn't disappeared. They had walked in a complete circle. Without realizing it, they were standing at the exact same shoreline where Carlos had vanished. The dying remains of last night's campfire still sat in the mud. Cold. Untouched. And just a few feet away, fresh ripples spread across the black water. Whatever had been watching them had been waiting for them to come back. For several seconds, no one moved. The cold ashes from last night's fire still lay scattered across the mud exactly where they had left them. Even Miguel couldn't explain it. 30 years in the Amazon. And he had never walked in a perfect circle without realizing it. Daniel slowly backed away from the shoreline. We're leaving. Miguel didn't answer. His eyes were fixed on the water. Something's wrong. Daniel looked at the river. It seemed calm. Too calm. Not a single insect landed on its surface. Not a fish disturbed it. Not even the current seemed willing to move. A bubble. One small bubble rose from the center of the river. Another. Then another. The water began trembling. Not splashing. Shaking. As though something unimaginably heavy had shifted beneath it. Raphael stepped backward. I've seen this before. Miguel looked at him. When? Raphael swallowed. When I was a boy. My father told me never to stay near a river that starts breathing. Daniel frowned. Rivers don't breathe. Raphael never looked away from the water. This one does. Another bubble surfaced. This time. Closer. 10 feet from shore. Then 5. Then. Nothing. Silence returned. Miguel slowly raised one hand. Nobody touched the water. Daniel nodded. His throat felt dry. Every instinct told him to run. But his legs refused to move. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the trees. Everyone spun around. A massive branch crashed to the ground only yards behind them. The noise echoed through the forest. Birds exploded into the sky. Monkeys screamed from the treetops. For the first time since sunrise, the jungle was alive again. Daniel exhaled in relief. It's gone. Miguel didn't. His eyes grew even wider. No. It wants us looking the other way. Daniel turned back toward the river. The shoreline was empty. The bubbles were gone. The ripples had disappeared. Nothing remained except a mirror-like surface reflecting the gray morning sky. For one hopeful second, he believed Miguel had been wrong. Then he noticed something impossible. Their reflections. There were 4 men standing on the bank. But the water showed. Daniel blinked. His heart pounded. The 5th shape stood between Miguel and Raphael. Tall. Its outline didn't match any of them. Before he could speak, the reflection vanished. Daniel stumbled backward. Did you see that? No one answered. Because at that exact moment, something enormous brushed against the muddy bank beneath the surface. Not fast. Not violently. Slowly. As though it were tracing the shoreline. Measuring it. Measuring them. Miguel whispered. Back away. Nobody argued. Each step felt painfully slow. Eyes fixed on the river. Waiting. Watching. Halfway to the tree line, Daniel heard it. A sound so faint he almost mistook it for the wind. A deep, steady exhale. It didn't come from the forest. It came from the water. The surface bulged upward. A dark shape rose just beneath it. Not breaking through. Only close enough to distort the reflection of the trees. The shape kept moving. Parallel to the shoreline. Keeping pace with them. No matter how slowly they walked. It matched their speed exactly. Daniel's breathing became shallow. It's following us. Miguel shook his head without taking his eyes off the river. No. His voice was barely audible. It's hurting us. Hurting us where? Miguel looked toward the flooded forest ahead. A narrow strip of dry land stretched between 2 pools of black water. The only possible path forward. The old hunter closed his eyes for a brief moment. When he opened them again, the fear in his face was unmistakable. We've been making one terrible mistake. Daniel stared at him. What mistake? Miguel answered quietly. We thought there was only one. At that exact instant, a heavy splash erupted behind them. Then another. From the opposite side. The hunters turned slowly. Ripples spread across both pools of water. 2 separate wakes. Moving at the same time. Closing in from different directions. For the first time since entering the Amazon, Miguel lowered his shotgun. Not because he had given up, but because he finally understood something terrifying. No amount of bullets could stop what they couldn't even see. No one fired. No one ran. They simply stood frozen, listening to the water move around them. 2 separate wakes. 2 different directions. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, both disappeared. Miguel lowered the shotgun. They're gone. Raphael slowly shook his head. No. They're somewhere we can't see. Daniel had heard enough. We're leaving. Right now. Miguel nodded. No arguments. They hurried into the trees, refusing to look back at the river. For nearly an hour they walked without stopping. The forest slowly became quieter again. Not silent. Just quiet enough that every footstep sounded too loud. Then Daniel stopped. Wait. Miguel turned. What is it? Daniel pointed toward the ground. Fresh footprints. Boot prints. Only one person could have made them. Carlos. The prints led away from the river and deeper into the jungle. Daniel's face lit up. He's alive. Miguel knelt beside the tracks. His expression didn't change. These were made last night. How do you know? The rain. He pointed to tiny droplets still trapped inside the prints. The storm ended before sunrise. These are older than they look. Daniel refused to believe it. Carlos is ahead of us. Without waiting for anyone, he followed the trail. Daniel? Miguel shouted. But it was too late. The young hunter disappeared between the vines. The others had no choice but to follow. The trail wound through dense forest until it reached a small clearing. And there, they found Carlos's backpack. It lay half buried in the mud. One shoulder strap had been torn clean off. Daniel picked it up. Everything inside was still there. His water bottle. His knife. Extra ammunition. Nothing had been stolen. Nothing had been touched. Only Carlos was missing. Miguel slowly looked around the clearing. No struggle. No blood. No drag marks. Rafael crossed himself. People don't just disappear. Miguel didn't answer. Instead, he noticed something hanging from a low branch. A strip of red cloth. Carlos had tied one to his backpack before they left the village. It was his way of marking trails. Miguel followed the ribbon with his eyes. Another ribbon hung 20 feet away. Then another. And another. A line of red markers disappeared into the trees. Daniel smiled for the first time all day. He was leaving us a trail. Miguel wasn't convinced. Or he wanted someone to find where he went. They followed the ribbons in complete silence. The deeper they walked, the older the forest became. The trees grew enormous. Their roots twisted through the earth like giant walls. Sunlight barely reached the ground. The air smelled of wet moss and decaying wood. Then Rafael suddenly froze. His face turned white. Miguel? What? Rafael pointed ahead. At first, Daniel couldn't understand what he was seeing. Then his eyes adjusted. Bones. Animal bones. Hundreds of them. Scattered across the forest floor. Capybara skulls. Broken turtle shells. Deer antlers. Even the skeleton of a black caiman lay half covered in leaves. The clearing looked like a graveyard. Miguel whispered, "Nobody move." Daniel looked around nervously. "What is this place?" Miguel swallowed. "A feeding ground." No one spoke. The realization settled over them like the heavy jungle air. Predators often return to places where hunting is easy. And whatever had fed here had done so for years. Daniel noticed something else. The red ribbons ended here. The last one fluttered gently from a branch directly above the bones. Carlos had stopped marking the trail. Not because he had reached safety. Because he had never gone any farther. A cold breeze swept through the clearing. The leaves overhead rustled softly. Then something wet landed on Daniel's shoulder. He looked down. Dark red. A single drop. His heartbeat stopped. Slowly. Very slowly. He looked up into the canopy. The branches were so thick that almost nothing could be seen. Only darkness. Vines. And something that looked like another heavy branch resting across the limbs high above them. Miguel followed Daniel's gaze. His eyes widened. That wasn't a branch. It was covered in olive green scales. And it was beginning to move. Nobody moved. Not even to breathe. The branch, hanging high in the canopy, shifted almost imperceptibly. A single scale caught a beam of sunlight breaking through the leaves. Then another. Daniel's mouth went dry. It wasn't a branch. It was a body. An impossibly thick body. Coiled around the limbs of an ancient kapok tree. Only now did they understand why the forest floor below was covered with bones. This wasn't random. This was an ambush site. Miguel slowly raised 2 fingers without taking his eyes off the canopy. The signal meant only one thing. Back away. No one argued. One careful step. Then another. Every boot sank into the wet earth with a soft squelch. Daniel couldn't stop staring upward. The snake still hadn't moved. It almost looked asleep. Until its tongue slipped from its mouth. A quick black flick. Testing the air. Testing them. Miguel whispered, "It's awake." Daniel felt panic rising in his chest. "Should we run?" Miguel answered immediately. "No. If it wanted to strike from there, it already would have." Those words should have been comforting. Instead, they were terrifying. Because they meant the snake was choosing not to attack. Yet, a faint rustling came from somewhere behind them. Rafael turned his head. What was that? Miguel didn't. "Don't look away." The rustling came again. Closer. Branches swayed. Leaves trembled. Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears. "There are monkeys up there." Miguel's expression darkened. "No. The monkeys left hours ago." Another rustle. This time from their left. Then another from their right. The forest seemed to be closing around them. Daniel realized something horrifying. The sounds weren't coming from the trees. They were coming from the ground. Something heavy was sliding through the fallen leaves, circling the clearing, hidden by thick ferns. Miguel's voice dropped to almost nothing. We're surrounded. Daniel looked from the canopy to the undergrowth. His mind raced. How many are there? Miguel didn't answer. He didn't know. A sudden crash echoed overhead. The enormous snake uncoiled a single loop. The branch beneath it bent under the weight. Dead leaves drifted silently toward the ground. The hunters instinctively stepped backward. Another loop loosened. The snake wasn't falling. It was climbing down, slowly, patiently, like thick ropes being lowered from the sky. Daniel had never imagined something so large could move so quietly. No roar, no hiss, only the faint scrape of scales against bark. Miguel finally made a decision. Smoke. Daniel frowned. What? The fire kit. Daniel ripped open his backpack with shaking hands. Inside was a waterproof tin containing dry bark, resin, and a small ferro rod. Miguel pointed toward a pile of damp leaves. Quickly. Within seconds, a weak flame flickered to life. Miguel threw handfuls of green leaves onto it. The fire hissed. Dense white smoke billowed upward. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the snake stopped descending. Its head lifted slightly. Its tongue flicked faster now, testing the thick cloud. Miguel kept feeding the fire. More leaves. More smoke. The white haze spread beneath the canopy until the giant coils were partly hidden. The hunters slowly backed away. One step. Then another. No sudden movements. No running. The snake remained motionless. Watching. Measuring. Waiting. They had almost reached the edge of the clearing when Daniel heard a sound behind him. A whisper. Soft enough to mistake for the wind. Daniel? His blood turned to ice. It was Carlos. He knew that voice. He spun around. Carlos. Miguel lunged toward him. Don't. But Daniel had already taken 3 steps back into the clearing. The voice came again. Weak. Broken. Help me. This time it sounded closer. From somewhere behind the enormous tree. Daniel's eyes filled with hope. He's alive. He rushed toward the trunk. Miguel cursed and sprinted after him. As Daniel rounded the tree, he froze. There was no Carlos. Only a patch of churned mud, a broken machete, and a weathered hunting hat lying upside down in a shallow pool of rainwater. Carlos's hat. Daniel slowly bent down and picked it up. Something inside clinked softly. He reached into the hat's lining. His fingers closed around a small metal pendant Carlos always wore around his neck. The leather cord had snapped clean in two. Daniel stared at it in silence. Miguel caught up and looked down. His face told Daniel everything. Carlos hadn't dropped it. It had been torn away. Then Miguel noticed something else in the mud. A message. Not written with ink. Scratched into the wet earth with the tip of a knife. 3 shaky words. Don't follow me. Before anyone could speak, a deep, thunderous splash echoed from somewhere beyond the trees. The ground beneath their boots vibrated. Miguel slowly closed his eyes. Run. For the first time since entering the Amazon, no one questioned his order. Nobody looked back. Branches whipped across their faces as they sprinted through the flooded forest. Roots reached out like twisted fingers catching their boots. Daniel stumbled once, then twice. But Miguel grabbed his arm before he hit the ground. Stay on your feet. Behind them, the jungle exploded with noise. Birds burst from the canopy. Monkeys screamed. Something enormous crashed through the undergrowth. Not fast. Heavy. Methodical. Each movement carried enough weight to shake loose leaves from the trees. Raphael was breathing hard. I can't hear it anymore. Miguel didn't slow down. That's what scares me. The forest suddenly opened into another stretch of black water. The hunters stopped so abruptly that Daniel nearly ran into Miguel. The path ended at a flooded channel nearly 40 feet wide. On the opposite bank, dry land. Safety. Or at least a chance. Between them, only dark water. Daniel looked left, then right. No bridge. No fallen tree. Nothing. We have to swim. Miguel turned so sharply his expression startled everyone. No. But no one enters that water. Daniel pointed behind them. And if we stay here? Miguel's voice was barely audible. We die tired. Silence. The hunters stared at the river. The surface looked perfectly calm. Too calm. Then Raphael noticed something floating near the center. A log. Miguel didn't even look. There are no logs here. The object drifted closer. 10 yards away. Daniel narrowed his eyes. It looked exactly like driftwood. Long, dark, weathered. Then, it turned. Without creating a ripple. 2 amber eyes broke the surface. The giant anaconda wasn't crossing the river. It was already in it, watching them, waiting. No one spoke. The snake didn't strike. It simply floated, blocking the only crossing. Daniel whispered, "It's trapping us." Miguel nodded slowly. "That's exactly what it's doing." A loud crack echoed behind them. Another. Then another. The hunters spun around. The undergrowth began to sway. Not in one place. In several. Something else was moving through the forest. Large enough to bend young trees as it passed. Daniel felt trapped between 2 nightmares. The jungle behind. The river ahead. Miguel reached into his pack and pulled out a tightly wrapped bundle. Daniel frowned. "What is that?" Miguel unwrapped it carefully. Inside were several small sticks wrapped in waxed cloth. Homemade signal flares. "We only get one chance." He handed one to Daniel. "When I say throw it as far as you can." Daniel nodded, his hands shaking. Miguel struck a match. The flare hissed, then burst into a blinding red flame. For the first time all day, the jungle glowed crimson. The smoke was thick. The light reflected off the black water like liquid blood. Miguel waited. The anaconda didn't move. It simply watched. Now, Daniel hurled the burning flare far downriver. It landed with a violent splash. Steam hissed upward. For one long second, nothing happened. Then the surface exploded. A massive coil erupted from the water, not where the hunters stood but where the flare had landed. Water shot several feet into the air. The snake had struck at the sudden movement. Miguel didn't hesitate. "Go." The hunters sprinted along the narrow bank while the giant predator thrashed in the river behind them. Daniel risked one glance over his shoulder. He instantly wished he hadn't. For the first time, he saw the full length of the creature. Coils rolled beneath the surface like fallen tree trunks. Its body seemed to go on forever before disappearing back into the black water. The flare burned out. Darkness returned to the river. And just as quickly, everything became still again. Miguel slowed to a stop. "No." Daniel looked at him. "What?" Miguel stared at the water. "It didn't miss." "What do you mean?" "It wasn't trying to catch the flare." Daniel felt a chill crawl up his spine. "Then why did it strike?" Miguel's eyes never left the river. "It wanted us to run." Raphael frowned. "Why?" Miguel slowly turned toward the dense wall of jungle ahead. Because hidden among the trees, they saw something they hadn't noticed before. An abandoned wooden hunting cabin. Its roof had partially collapsed. Its walls were covered with vines. The front door hung open, swaying gently in the wind. Daniel's face lit up. "Shelter." Miguel didn't smile. He looked at the cabin for a long moment. Then he quietly said, "I've hunted this region for over 30 years. I've never seen a cabin here." A cold breeze drifted through the broken doorway. Inside, the darkness looked deeper than the jungle itself. Then, a faint sound floated out. 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. No one had touched the door. Nobody stepped inside. Not yet. The cabin stood in complete silence, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to lean toward it. Its walls were covered with thick green moss. Vines had grown through broken windows. The roof sagged beneath years of rain. It looked abandoned. Not for months. Not for years. For decades. Another knock echoed from inside. Knock, knock, knock. Daniel swallowed. "Someone's in there." Miguel slowly shook his head. "No. No one has lived here in a very long time." "Then what made that sound?" Before Miguel could answer, the front door creaked open another few inches. Not quickly. Slowly. As if someone had pushed it from the inside. A cold draft drifted out. It carried the smell of mold, rotting wood, and something metallic. Blood. Raphael quietly crossed himself. "We shouldn't go in." Miguel looked back toward the river. The black water was barely visible through the trees. Then he looked into the jungle behind them. The undergrowth was perfectly still. Too still. "If we stay outside, we're exposed." He tightened his grip on the shotgun. "If we go inside, at least we control one direction." Daniel didn't like the logic, but he couldn't argue with it. Miguel stepped through the doorway first. The wooden floor groaned beneath his boots. Dust filled the air. The cabin was far larger than it had appeared from outside. A rusted lantern still hung from the ceiling. A broken table lay on its side. 3 wooden chairs had collapsed with age. Everything was covered in a thick layer of gray dust. Everything. Except one chair. Daniel noticed it immediately. Its seat was clean. As if someone had been sitting there recently. Miguel noticed it too. Don't touch anything. The walls were covered with deep scratches. Not random marks. Groups of 4. Always 4. Running from the floor almost to the ceiling. Daniel ran his flashlight across them. They're too far apart to be claws. Miguel didn't answer. His light stopped on something nailed to the far wall. An old leather journal. The cover had cracked with age. The pages had turned yellow. But it was still there. Waiting. Miguel carefully lifted it down. Most of the pages had rotted away. The remaining ones were stuck together by years of humidity. He slowly peeled them apart. The first entries described hunting trips, fishing, weather, ordinary life in the Amazon. Then the handwriting changed. The letters became shaky, uneven, as if the writer had stopped sleeping. Daniel read aloud. Day 11. The river follows us. He frowned. What does that mean? Miguel turned the page. Day 14. We killed 1 snake. The others didn't leave. Silence filled the cabin. Daniel looked up. Others? Miguel kept reading. Day 17. It isn't the biggest one we should fear. It's the oldest. Raphael's breathing became shallow. The oldest? Miguel flipped to the final page. Half of it had been torn away. Only a few lines remained. If anyone finds this, don't camp near. The sentence ended there. The rest of the page was missing. Daniel searched the floor. There has to be another page. Then, he noticed fresh mud. Not outside. Inside. A single wet footprint crossed the dusty floor. Bare. Human. It hadn't been there when they entered. It began at the doorway, passed directly between them, and ended at the clean chair. The chair was no longer empty. A small object rested on the seat. No one had heard it being placed there. Miguel slowly approached. His flashlight beam trembled. It was a compass. Rusted. Daniel recognized it instantly. Carlos. Miguel looked at him. How do you know? Daniel picked it up with shaking hands. Carved into the back were 2 initials. Citam. Carlos Mendez. The compass needle spun wildly for a few seconds. Then, it stopped. Not pointing north. Not pointing south. It pointed directly at the cabin floor. Everyone stared. Miguel slowly knelt. He knocked once on the wooden boards. Solid. He knocked again a few feet away. Solid. Then he knocked where the compass pointed. Thunk. Hollow. No one spoke. Miguel looked at Daniel. Then at Raphael. If there's a space beneath us. He paused. I think that's where Carlos went. Before anyone could react. A loud crash shook the entire cabin. The walls trembled. Dust poured from the ceiling. Outside. Something massive scraped along the outer wall. Slowly. Patiently. As if it had finally found them. The scraping stopped. Not gradually. Instantly. As if whatever had been outside had suddenly decided to listen. No one moved. Miguel slowly lowered himself onto one knee, keeping the shotgun aimed at the front door. Daniel? The floor. Daniel swallowed hard. Using the blade of his hunting knife, he dug into the narrow gap between 2 old wooden planks. The wood was swollen from years of moisture. It refused to budge. He pushed harder. The blade slipped. Then, crack. One of the boards lifted just enough to reveal darkness underneath. A cold gust of air escaped from below. It smelled ancient. Wet soil. Rotting wood. And something else. Something that made Daniel's stomach twist. Miguel helped pry the rest of the boards free. Beneath them was a narrow ladder disappearing into complete darkness. Raphael stared into the opening. No one builds a cellar in the middle of a flooded rainforest. Miguel shined his flashlight downward. The beam disappeared before reaching the bottom. It wasn't built for food. Daniel looked at him. What was it built for? Miguel answered without taking his eyes off the hole. I think it was built to hide. A loud thud echoed from outside. Boom. The entire cabin shook. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Another impact. This one stronger. The front wall groaned under the pressure. Daniel looked toward the door. It's trying to get in. Miguel's expression hardened. No. It already knows we're here. He grabbed the lantern from the table and lit it with trembling hands. The weak flame filled the cellar entrance with a warm orange glow. I'll go first. Daniel immediately objected. No. Miguel turned to him. If something's down there, It'll come for the first man. Without another word, Miguel climbed down the ladder. One step, then another. The wood creaked beneath his weight. When his boots finally touched the ground, he raised the lantern. The light revealed a cramped underground room. Stone walls. A dirt floor. Old wooden shelves. Most had collapsed years ago. Scattered across the ground were rusted cooking pots, broken rifles, mold-covered blankets, and dozens of empty kerosene cans. Someone had lived here. Not for days. For months. Daniel climbed down after him. Raphael followed, pulling the trapdoor halfway closed above them. The sounds from outside became muffled. For the first time all day, the jungle felt far away. Then Daniel noticed the walls. Names. Hundreds of names. Scratched into the wood with knives. Some were barely readable. Others looked fresh. He slowly read a few aloud. Antonio. Lucas. Enrique. Then. His voice caught. Carlos Mendez. Fresh. The letters had been carved recently. The cuts were still sharp. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. He was here. Miguel stepped closer. Beneath Carlos's name, someone had carved another sentence. The handwriting was rushed. Uneven. Almost desperate. ID doesn't hunt when it's hungry. It hunts when you panic. Silence filled the room. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? Miguel stared at the words for several seconds. Then he whispered, "It means we've been doing exactly what it wants." Before anyone could respond, something heavy landed on the cabin roof. The entire ceiling groaned. Dust poured down around them. Then came a sound none of them had heard before. Not a hiss. Not a growl. A long, slow exhale. Directly above their heads. The lantern flame flickered. Raphael looked toward the ladder. "We have to leave." Miguel shook his head. "No. Listen." The breathing stopped. A second later, they heard wood splintering. Not from the front door. From the roof. The old beams began cracking one by one. Crack, crack, crack. Something impossibly heavy was crawling across the cabin. Testing it. Searching for a way inside. Then, the lantern illuminated something hidden behind the collapsed shelves. A narrow tunnel. Barely large enough for one person to crawl through. Cold air drifted out of it. Fresh air. Miguel's eyes widened. This wasn't a cellar. Daniel looked from the tunnel to the ladder. What was it? Miguel raised the lantern. It was an escape route. Another deafening crack echoed overhead. One of the ceiling beams snapped in half. The dirt ceiling rained down onto the floor. The cabin wasn't going to hold much longer. Miguel looked at the tunnel. Then at Daniel. We have one chance. Whatever's waiting at the other end. He paused as another beam splintered above them. It can't be worse than what's already here. Behind them. The ladder suddenly jerked sideways. As if something above had wrapped itself around it. Then, very slowly, the first rung disappeared upward into darkness. Pull. One rung at a time. By something neither of them could see. The first rung vanished into the darkness above. Then the second. Then the third. Each disappeared with a slow, deliberate scrape, as if something impossibly strong was peeling the ladder away one piece at a time. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. Whatever was above them had found the entrance. Miguel raised the lantern toward the tunnel. Move. Daniel dropped to his hands and knees first. The tunnel was barely wide enough to crawl through. Wet clay pressed against his shoulders. Roots hung from the ceiling like twisted veins. Every movement filled the cramped passage with the sound of scraping boots and ragged breathing. Behind him, Raphael whispered, "I can't see the end." Miguel crawled in last. Before entering, he looked back one final time. The lantern illuminated the ladder. Or what was left of it. A massive olive-green coil slowly slid through the opening where the floorboards had been. It wasn't rushing. It wasn't forcing its way in. It was simply following. Miguel extinguished the lantern. Darkness swallowed them. Only one flashlight remained. Daniel switched it on. The narrow beam revealed fresh claw marks carved into the tunnel walls. Not from an animal. From people. Dozens of them. Some scratches were nothing more than desperate lines. Others formed words. One message appeared over and over again. Don't stop crawling. Daniel's heart pounded. Who wrote these? Miguel answered quietly. The ones who didn't make it. The tunnel sloped downward. The air grew colder. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling. Then Daniel's hand touched something hard. He froze. It wasn't a rock. He aimed the flashlight. A human skull stared back at him from the mud. The lower jaw was missing. Its empty eye sockets were packed with dirt. Daniel jerked backward in horror. The flashlight beam swept across the tunnel floor. Another skull. Then another. Rusted lanterns. Broken rifles. Rotting backpacks. The tunnel wasn't an escape route. It was a grave. Raphael's voice trembled. They all died trying to get out. Miguel knelt beside one skeleton. Something was clutched tightly in its hand. A faded leather notebook. The pages crumbled as he opened it. Only the final entry remained readable. If you're reading this, don't fear the snake. Fear the river. The river always brings it back. Daniel frowned. What does that mean? Before Miguel could answer, a low rumble echoed through the tunnel. At first it sounded like distant thunder. Then the ground beneath them began to vibrate. Tiny pebbles bounced across the mud. The vibration grew stronger. Closer. Daniel turned the flashlight toward the passage behind them. For several seconds. Nothing. Then, two amber eyes appeared in the darkness. Far away. Completely still. The beam reflected off them like polished glass. The eyes never blinked. They simply watched. Daniel's breathing caught in his throat. It's here. Miguel slowly stood. No. He tightened his grip on the shotgun. It's been here the whole time. The eyes disappeared. The darkness became silent once more. Too silent. Then came the sound they had been dreading all night. Scales scraping against wet earth. Slowly. Patiently. Getting closer. Miguel looked ahead. The tunnel finally began to rise. A faint stream of daylight filtered through tangled roots. There's the exit. Hope surged through the group for the first time in hours. Daniel crawled faster. The opening grew larger with every movement. Fresh air rushed into the tunnel. He could smell rain. Trees. Freedom. Daniel pushed aside a curtain of roots and pulled himself out. He stood up. Then froze. Miguel emerged beside him. His face turned pale. This can't be right. Daniel looked around. The tunnel had not brought them to safety. It had brought them back to the exact same riverbank where everything had begun. The ashes from their first campfire were still scattered across the mud. Carlos's broken paddle still rested against the same tree. And tied to that tree was their missing canoe. Exactly where they had first left it. As if no one had ever touched it. Daniel whispered, "We've been here before." Miguel slowly shook his head. No. His eyes locked onto the canoe. There wasn't anyone sitting in it before. Daniel followed his gaze. A lone figure sat motionless in the stern. Head lowered. Hat covering its face. Its clothes were soaked. Its hands rested quietly on its knees. For one impossible moment, Daniel smiled. Carlos. The figure slowly lifted its head. It wasn't Carlos. It had no eyes. Only two empty black sockets filled with river water. And then, it smiled. Nobody moved. The figure in the canoe remained perfectly still. River water streamed from its clothes, dripping silently into the black water below. Drip, drip, drip. Daniel felt his heartbeat pounding in his ears. Miguel? His voice barely escaped his throat. What is that? Miguel didn't answer. For the first time in 30 years. The old hunter had no explanation. The figure slowly stood. Its movements were unnaturally smooth, almost as if it had no bones. Its head tilted to one side. Then another. Studying them. Without warning, the canoe drifted away from the shore. There were no paddles. No current. It simply glided into the mist. After only a few seconds, it disappeared completely. Daniel blinked. It's gone. Miguel grabbed his arm. No. Don't look at the river. Run. The hunters sprinted toward the canoe tied to the tree. Miguel slashed the rope with his knife. The boat splashed into the water. Get in. Daniel and Raphael climbed aboard. Miguel shoved the canoe away from shore before jumping in after them. Daniel? The paddle? The canoe shot forward. For the first few seconds, nothing happened. The river remained perfectly calm. Then, a wave rolled beneath them. Not from the wind. From below. The entire canoe lifted several inches before crashing back onto the surface. Raphael looked over the side. I can't see the bottom. Miguel shouted. Keep paddling. Another wave. Closer. This time something brushed the underside of the canoe. The sound echoed through the wooden hull. Thunk. Daniel stopped paddling. What was that? Miguel's face hardened. It found us. The water beside the canoe bulged upward. A thick olive-green coil emerged beside them, glistening in the afternoon light. Then another. The river erupted. The giant Anaconda exploded from beneath the surface, sending a wall of water crashing over the canoe. Daniel lost his paddle. Raphael nearly fell overboard. The snake didn't strike. It wrapped. One massive coil slammed against the side of the canoe, tilting it violently. Wood groaned under the pressure. Miguel fired. Boom. The gunshot echoed across the river. Birds burst from the treetops. The snake recoiled for only a heartbeat. Then it came again. Harder. The canoe cracked. Water poured inside. "We're sinking," Daniel yelled. Miguel threw the empty shotgun aside. "Listen to me." His voice was calm. Far too calm. "When I tell you, jump." Daniel stared at him. "What about you?" Miguel looked toward the approaching coil. A faint smile crossed his weathered face. "I've spent my whole life learning this jungle. It taught me one final lesson. Sometimes, the only way to save others is to become what the predator wants." Before Daniel could answer, Miguel grabbed the emergency fuel bottle from beneath the seat. He soaked his jacket, his hands, the broken paddle. Then he struck a match. For one brilliant instant, the old hunter became a silhouette surrounded by fire. The giant snake lunged. Miguel leaped onto its broad back as flames spread across his clothes. The burning fuel splashed across the snake's wet scales. The river erupted into chaos. The Anaconda twisted violently, thrashing through the water with incredible force. Huge waves rolled across the river. "Now!" Miguel shouted. "Go!" Daniel seized the remaining paddle. He and Raphael drove the canoe toward the opposite bank with every ounce of strength they had left. Behind them, the river boiled. Fire reflected across the black water. Then came one final deafening splash. After that, silence. Daniel reached the muddy shore and collapsed. He turned back toward the river. Nothing remained. No flames. No snake. No Miguel. Only drifting smoke. And calm black water stretching to the horizon. 3 days later, rescue teams found Daniel and Raphael wandering near a small riverside village. They were dehydrated, exhausted, barely able to speak. When the villagers heard where they had come from, the oldest among them fell silent. Finally, an elderly fisherman spoke. "My grandfather warned us about that bend in the river." Daniel looked up. "What did he say?" The old man stared toward the distant jungle. "He said the river remembers everyone, but it never gives everyone back." Weeks later, another hunting party prepared to enter the same stretch of the Amazon. The youngest hunter laughed when the villagers warned him to stay away from the Blackwater Channel. "Stories," he said. "Just stories." His canoe disappeared into the morning mist. Hours later, the river became strangely quiet. The birds stopped singing. The insects fell silent. And far beneath the surface, 2 amber eyes opened. Watching. Waiting. Patient. Because some places in the Amazon never stop hunting. 6 months later, the story had already spread across nearby villages. Some dismissed it as grief. Others called it another Amazon legend. Officially, the report was simple. 3 hunters entered the rainforest. 2 returned. 1 was never found. No body. No weapon. No trace. Only a damaged canoe and a notebook recovered from an abandoned hunting cabin. The notebook was soaked, its pages fused together by mud and river water. Only the final sentence could still be read. "If the jungle goes silent, leave before it notices you." The cabin itself was never found again. Search teams returned to the coordinates Daniel had marked on his map. They found nothing. No ruins. No cellar. No tunnel. Just untouched rainforest. It was as if the cabin had never existed. Daniel never hunted again. Whenever reporters asked what really happened that day, he always gave the same answer. "I don't know." Then after a long silence he would quietly add, "But I know one thing. It wasn't protecting its territory. It was protecting something deeper in that river." Years passed. The Amazon kept flowing. The trees kept growing. The jungle slowly reclaimed every footprint, every campsite, every scar left behind by people who believed they could conquer it. Nature forgot them. Or so it seemed. Then one rainy afternoon, a team of wildlife researchers reviewing drone footage over a remote Blackwater channel noticed something unusual. The camera captured only a few seconds before the battery died. At first, nothing. Just dark water beneath the rainforest canopy. Then a long shadow drifted beneath the surface. Too straight to be a current. Too large to be a fallen tree. The shadow changed direction. It moved against the flow of the river. The drone operator zoomed in. For a single frame, 2 amber eyes broke the surface. The footage ended there. The researchers could never identify what they had seen. Some believed it was an unusually large anaconda. Others believed the low-resolution video had distorted a floating log. No conclusion was ever reached. The file was archived. The river remained unnamed. And somewhere deep beneath the endless green canopy, the black water grew still once again. Because the Amazon doesn't need monsters to be terrifying. It only needs enough darkness to hide whatever is waiting beneath.